Tommy, who's the, perhaps not the greatest composer, but who's the greater composer? Frank Zappa or Tommy Mars?
Oh, undoubtedly Frank Zappa.
Okay. We get a hierarchy here. That's a joke question. But
Yes.
this is the point, is that I think that Frank is the most incredible musician of at least I don't know if you can say the whole 20th century, but he's a culmination of what was developed in the first half of the 20th century, and he's the greatest amazing composer of the second half of the 20th century over all forms of music. Now, would you go that far?
Well, I'd like to back up.
Okay.
Now, that question bugs me, your primary question.
Right.
Because I don't look at myself as a composer. But I do compose.
Right.
And I compose spontaneously. That's my forte.
Which Frank does. Yeah.
Yes, and which we were all hired, well, many of us were hired to do. But when it comes to the place in historical perspective, which we're talking about,
Yeah.
I completely agree with you about, in not just American music, but music in general.
Mm.
Frank, to me, is like the quintessential, foremost perpetrator of the beyond.
Yes.
I mean, there was times, and this is what triggers me to talk about this, is that when you talk of composition, there are many times when certain musical institutions, devices, if you will, compositional, what's the word, like signature or
Genres? You don't mean genres?
a genre, if
Yeah.
you will. But Frank was very proud many times to say that he never went to school.
Right.
You know what I mean? It
Yeah.
was like a big thing to him. But he studied.
Yeah.
I mean, he studied. He just never formalized that like many people have done. And when certain guys were in the band, me for instance, things of my training, my background, my personality, my signature, they rubbed off on him, and he was the type of guy that it was like a dichotomy, because he was so controlling, and yet he wasn't a dummy. He would extract this stuff very subtly, and he was the type of man to work with that he rarely complimented, and it wasn't like you were there to get accolades from him. It was just a thrill to be around that kind of a test tube, man. And when he could hear something that he never heard before, a perfect example is a device of the 14th century by a man named Landini. He had a certain type of cadence that all of the music of Mauchot, Landini, many of the examples of that period used this particular cadence. And I'm very familiar with early music like that, and I would start throwing it in occasionally, and well, I'll never forget one time he asked me, what is that? And I said, it's a Landini cadence. And he started actually throwing it in. I think it's in that one song, Frogs with Dirty Little Legs. I mean, he would bastardize it, though. That's the thing that always killed me. He would drill the point home until it never, every album, like, either has an electronic device on it that's you know, you can't
Is
stand
that
it
the
anymore.
mystery? It's a variation of the mystery word or mystery for the night. It's the mystery technology or the mystery riff. Is that the variation?
That's the variation, Bob. You hit it on the head.
Yeah.
And you could almost see that in every record. Frank was the kind of guy, too, that would take it to the max. He not only was in your face, he cut off your face.
That's
you know what I
right.
mean? He just plowed through your face
Yeah,
with
yeah.
something. And I like that. You know what I mean? People today, I think, really need to get that point. You know, there's so much...
About Frank, you mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so anyway, in terms of the first question you were asking, his compositional prowess came many times from just keeping the radar up, man.
Yeah.
And
Knowing what to find.
Exactly. Knowing what to find,
Yeah.
right, that was in tune with him, that he
Yeah.
could really use. And a lot of people that are serious composers, as he was, are like chained to a particular tradition or a mindset. And the glory of Frank was that freedom. He's America to death. You know
That's
what I mean?
right.
It's just like every inch of him was an American. And
which was the second half century is a mixed media world, you know.
So I wanted to qualify that about,
Yeah.
you know, being the best composer, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because he definitely took, synthesized, and excreted,
Right.
you know?
Now let me just supplement, because you know, I have all theory that I'm working out in my own writings and drama that stands on the shoulders of Frank. And I'm going to go to a quote in Ben's book in a minute, but the fact that my chart is the archetypes of American media in politics, and Frank did that. Now the incredible thing about Frank is that he wasn't a musician. He wasn't a category. He was a TV camera. Your idea of this raider, he was the central scrutinizer. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And he was imitating whatever you want to call the secret government or the big brother or the media monopoly of American culture. He was mirroring that back and eating anything that it could come along. So he was imitating the central scrutinizer, and it was a bizarre new phenomenon for the world to see. That's why the central scrutinizer is this weird automobile and UFO within the gypsy mutant vacuum cleaner, that apparatus. Now, I haven't developed it, but do you want to respond to that point? That he was more than a musician. That's why he's greater.
I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
That was only his forum. That was where he could, the fertile area that he could meld together. And I'd like to also expand upon what you're saying here by when you see that mirror. The key to Frank was laughter.
Yeah. Does humor belong in music? That's an archetypal question.
Yeah, but it's like a tongue-in-cheek.
But it's like.
But the point I'm trying to make is that if in fact we can laugh at ourselves, no matter what's going on, we're healthier species for it.
Right.
And that has always been, you know, people.
But you know what we were? People were music. That was the dominant medium of the 50s, 60s, 70s.
That's
so
right.
You had a guy who had a supreme understanding of generally all the variety of the encyclopedic view of music. You needed that kind of guy who could zap everybody who was brainwashed in a musical culture. So he had to go with the present medium, which was music, and be detached from it and nail everybody on it. You know what I mean?
Right. That's right.
That's what he was doing. That's what I mean. He's not a musician.
Not a musician, man.
He was using the present ground, like Finnegan's Wake is a book. He redid Finnegan's Wake, but Finnegan's Wake does not apply to after World War II. Because people started not to read, and you had a new environment that was the new sugar, that was the new candy, the food that was controlling him. And he was Uncle Meat, and he was doing recooking the food to create perception, to people wake up, figure it out.
Right.
It was so, and if you dug that, I'd like to have you give if you can give some personal way he would hint, like, he never said what I just said to you, or did he?
No.
Right.
That was a given in the equation.
But is that part of the test?
It's like, I have a little story
Yeah.
about my audition with Frank. When I first saw on a sheet of paper that was published, the bottom of the page says, Munchkin music.
Ooh. Yeah.
Now,
Munchkins get me hot.
I have always loved The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
And it was sort of a terrible joke that Frank would just keep on at me, that I said, "Did you like The Wizard of Oz?" And Frank said,
He would do that? No, you
No,
would.
check it out.
Yeah. You'd go that.
He caught me one time on an airplane, and I said, "You like The Wizard of Oz, huh?" And he said, "I think I saw it once." and I couldn't take that. I just couldn't stand it. That he would keep drilling me on that, you know what I mean? And
you asked him first.
I asked him first,
Then
but I didn't want to believe that and it was always this, I always wanted him to admit that he loved The Wizard of Oz. You know, why name your
the whole music world
publishing company massive, prodigious amounts of music under the word Munchkin music if you don't dig The Wizard of Oz? And he would never cop to it, and it was always frustrating. I'd always
You tried to catch him.
I tried to change the question into different things, allude to different things, and he wouldn't. He always had his story straight.
Right.
And to this day, I don't know if it's true or not. He kept that mystery going.
You were dealing with Rumpelstiltskin.
Hello.
And he wasn't going to fucking tell you his name. You know what I mean?
At least in that forum.
In that whole his roots. Now, what's funny? He lists 184 sources on Freakout. You know, but that was the red herring. You know,
red herring, baby. That's right.
Now he says with Zubin Mehta in 1970, he's UCLA when he conducted the beginning of 200 Motels and that music. He had somebody saying, it was in the Time magazine. I never heard it, but I saw the Time magazine coverage, it's someone yelling, "Munchkins get me hot." And he wanted that in there. Now, did he have Munchkin music before in 68, 69?
Oh,
I
yeah.
assume,
Yes,
right.
yes.
So he's got Munchkins. And then, why did he always start putting in mu mesons and physics terms and saying, he never said it, but Munchkins get my hot. And on Civilization Phase 3, he talks about mu mesons with halos. And you look at the booklet in Uncle Meat, he's got the young doll mu meson foot voluptuizer, some kind of thing. Why did he ever talk to you about physics or these other non-musical technical points? That's what I'm interested in, what you picked up on that.
Let's put it this way. The atmosphere of that was always present, and the specifics of that were rare, were very rare.
But when you say present, he never said mu mesons much, but you're saying there was something hinting at that. The laboratory motif?
The laboratory motif, always there, and it's like sometimes, like for instance, politically, it was easy to talk to Frank. I remember when I Don't Want to Get Drafted started. I mean, anything. Frank had such knowledge, such scads of information up there on everything. He knew something about everything.
Because he scanned TV and everything all the time.
Scanned everything. Man.
That's how
it
much
was frightening. But the fact is, when you come down to literally his, in terms of physics, very little. I off the top of my head, I can't remember any specific thing, although it might come to me later.
Right. Now, this might be interesting in terms of you know, he's really getting the Synclavier between 84 and 88, and you're not working with him. So you got this Bob Stone guy, and these guys working with that thing. Now, maybe did you drop in and visit him?
Well, yeah. As a matter of fact, I used the Synclavier on Brown Moses. I did play the Synclavier.
Oh no, yeah, I know, but that period we really got in, like starting in 85.
By that time, Frank had no need for a keyboard player. He was typing it all in, and he actually, maybe this is a little bit where I can approach this from. That instrument for a particular period provided him with the robot he never had.
That's right.
And
which was all the metaphor. You were robots up to that point. Now
we were robots and puppets.
Right, but see the improvisation that goes on in American culture, which he celebrated, because they got to improvise bullshit news every day in the TV studio, right? Improvisation. It was a musical jazz environment people were living in. So he needed you guys to really mirror time. He had to have great musicians who could improvise and create, because that was what every day was different.
Absolutely.
You know, and so that's why you're not totally robots. You were robot, but you were very creative, lively mirrors of the lively American culture of the last 30 years. You know what I mean? And he had that. So what you were going, I just wanted, that's a thing, side thing. You were saying that, but you were the robot.
But when the Synclavier came in to the picture, it was just like, I believe that he transcended something. And
I mean, when he got that,
when he realized what it could really do for him.
Yeah.
And take, for instance, he used to call this concept of programming machine a Pinto. In which case,
a machine called Pinto, or
no, the concept. Let me quickly explain this, because it's something that we had talked about with the CS80. I had mentioned, you know, it would be so cool. I'm always looking for the humanness in a non-human environment.
Right.
That's why I loved in the early days synthesizing, because I looked for the unnatural, or the little difference.
The imperfection theme you talk about with Yuha.
The imperfection, yes. Yeah. And I remember saying to Frank, you know what would be so cool is if, in fact, you had like 4 or 5 sounds and intersperse them throughout the keyboard to be able to have a choir of sounds, but you would have to write the music so that the key would be playing, if you wanted, say, a clarinet section versus a bassoon versus a cello. You would have to do it so that it would be homogeneous with it. In other words, the writing would be indicative of the particular keys that you would be playing. But up to that point, you could never do anything like that. You know what I mean?
Right. You said this in the early years.
Yeah, when Frank was doing all the work on the CS80 for me, you know, because that was the major cross between digital and analog.
Yeah.
That instrument, and boy, did he spend a lot of money on that It still it came close, but when the Synclavier happened, this is when he was able to do that. And by Pinto, I mean exactly that. That you have like maybe 4 or 5 different sounds, and they're broken down into certain notes on the keyboard, so that when you're playing chromatically up, you're not hearing the same sound on every single note. But the fact is that when you hear it together, it sounds so human and so right, because that's how it is when we hear things like that. So when he was able to do things like that, suddenly the human musician wasn't really as important, and that spurred him into unbelievable new realms, man.
And this quote will do that. Now, just before we go into it, think of the Reagan, the Teflon president. You know, supposedly in Lemuria, the king, he had no awareness of anybody outside of his own circle, the court, whatever the structure of Lemurian society was, which was similar in pre-Atlantis. When a bridge fell down, or he saw a building fall down or something, he'd say, okay, we need a new building. And after a while, it would be rebuilt, but he couldn't literally see who built it. So he thought he was manifesting it. Now this is Reaganism. It's a Teflon. The White House had no access. This is xenocratic government, secret government that Frank talked about. Frank imitated that by saying, I'm going to run the whole world from the satellite position, and I'm the Grand Wazoo programming the whole planet musically from the Synclavier, which is this metaphor for the programming that the society was going through in the 80s.
That's a good metaphor, actually.
Yeah. So I'm going to go to this, but what about the word climate? You know this thing of notes and then creating something that sounds human. Does his use of the word harmonic climates, does that phrase apply to what you were talking about?
Absolutely.
Yeah, maybe you can elaborate on how he talked about that.
Yeah, you know, his music is such a dense environment.
Environments, that's the key thing.
Of humanness.
Yeah.
I mean, not just of humanness, but of organic life.
But he understood that machines were human, that they were part of it. So
well, truly, Frank had to be on the vanguard technologically. I mean, you talk to anybody for the past 30 or 40 years.
He was
always mention Frank in the avant-garde realm of always seeing ahead, grabbing that instrument and making it work, and then stamping a legitimacy to this instrument, and then other people would start using it.
He was the human translator then of this supposedly new alien.
Well, not only translator, a seer.
A seer,
You know what I mean? And that to me was like the greatest freaking gift. I'll never forget one time when we were in New York, and I couldn't go to Manny's that day. I had an interview to do with somebody, and Frank comes to the gig. I think it was Stony Brook, and he says, "I got you the greatest toy that you'll ever want to have." And he bought the vocoder.
Right.
And I had to fucking play the vocoder that night. I never even saw this instrument. He says, "You can do it." I said, "Frank, what are you talking about?" He says, "You waited all your life for this." Because he said, "We'll use the, the Eventide digital delay to let you harmonize with yourself." And we always thought we'd have like 2 or 3 of them. But this thing was like, it was already ready-made, baby.
No,
and I said, "I can't do it, Frank." He says, "Tommy."
Oh, you didn't do it?
No, he said, "Tommy."
Yeah.
I says, "Well, how long do we have between sound check and doors?" All right. You know, and we used it that night, man.
But the thing is, I heard you telling that story to U-Haul, and you told it a little more emotionally in the sense you have Frank, like the little kid, idiot, suddenly you're Zappa, you're the one who can do this stuff. He's there. You gotta do it. You know, he's like, Daddy, you gotta give me a fucking bicycle for Christmas. You know? It was that
There's a big thing that built up with that.
The emotion was in your voice when you told me how he responded.
But it was like that with all the instruments, man. When I joined the band, you know, like with his Emu, he could only get a stupid pipe organ thing out of that, and it was wired the same way as my Electrocon. But
so that's why I'm saying, are you the greater composer? You enhance the band's sound. You see, you know, other people actually get angry about it.
You know, I have to use the word synergy here.
Yeah.
Because I truly believe in that. People meet people for a reason.
Yeah.
No matter how outside the meeting could be, or from what
the
left
universe
field
works. It is working.
It's supposed to hit when it's supposed to hit.
Yeah.
And then this symbiosis just occurs.
Yeah. Symbiosis, right?
Yeah, and like
Well, that's what you were so perfect for him. He needed you in '77.
I needed him in '77.
Yeah, that's
you know,
right.
I couldn't keep a job playing in a hotel for more than 2 weeks. I couldn't put that mask on. I'd be like talking to you and telling you how fucked up you were. Where else do you get paid for doing that except Frank, man? And I was saying, why can't I like keep a freaking solo piano job anymore? I wanted to be myself.
Right.
You know?
And the thing about Frank, the grace that he had in his life is that someone would always show up, like Ian Underwood back at the Garret, would show up that would do what his dreams were trying to do, because he needed as much complexity. He's as wacko in rock, or in rock and roll, and the other specialized classical musicians, they aren't going to relate to a guy in the 60s in rock, but he found somebody who could do it. Which then
sure. But you know, and it's the season of the Olympics now, too, that I want to just say this, that, you know, Frank was like the ultimate gladiator coach. You'd show up with him with your tools, man, and your verve and your whatever you
training.
Whatever you had, man. You were the young lion going in, and that cat brought you from what you thought you were going to be to someone that you'd be afraid of because you were so high. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like sometimes when I would finish Herculean takes, and I would say, you know what? I know I can do this better, Frank. And he would look at me like, what are you talking about? And it wouldn't be like the money, it wouldn't be like going to overtime. He would just say, really? I said, yeah, when I played that last one, I just thought of something. He'd say, go ahead, work it out, let's hear it.
And he let you do
it. And that's not, you know, like the way music is done. Yeah. You do it, bam, you do it, bam, you do it, bam. Yeah. And in essence, many of the records were like that. Like, we would just go, and it's like, sometimes I didn't even feel like I was a human being anymore. I really felt like I was a machine operating for my coach. You know what I mean?
But you were into the beyond. It was a pleasurable experience, right?
Absolutely, because it stretched my mind to be into. What is
you know, Gurdjieff, his philosophy was we're all machines, and you've got to get rid of your anthropomorphic assumptions about yourself and get in touch with your machines.
That's right.
He always struck me as Gurdjieffian in that way.
Gurdjieffian. Well, I'm glad I did this interview if it was just for that.
Well,
Gurdjieffian.
You know,
I've never heard of him before.
Oh, check out his books at the Phoenix or something. You'll just see this whole philosophy was in the 20s and 30s. He's famous in the New Age as a Rasputin. He's much like Frank, a mysterious character who influenced people. I mean, he wasn't in the court like Rasputin, but he came out of Russia and he knew all the secret Sufi school stuff. And I read him in the 60s, and one of my first thoughts was to talk to Frank about that, but it never happened when I talked to him in 1970. I can't remember, but I eventually decided he was. But you're confirming it because that's right. You know, Colin Wilson wrote The Outsider.
Yeah.
I just heard a lecture. He's Gurdjieffian, and he says we've got to deal with the robot in ourselves, and also this other spat. He had the robot was your instinctive autonomic self, and the other part was the thing that was trying to deal with it, and you had to get a separation and merging, but it included the idea of resist not evil. Become the machine, become something, and then push yourself. That was the Gurdjieffian Colin Wilson. That's what I think you're saying, is that Frank pushed you. You became something scared you. See, that's the point.
Absolutely. Yeah. That you never knew that you could have this much power.
You became evil.
And on the other hand, you know, like, just speaking of the humanists, I can tell you two tales of one time an arc light fell down on me in rehearsal.
First word on Finnegan's Wake, first page, arc light, very important. That was the beginning of Electric Theater 150 years ago. But okay, go ahead.
And it's a hot beast, baby.
Yeah.
And my first thought was, I saw the CS80 melting, part of it, and I brushed it off quickly, you know what I mean? And like we were in the middle of a song, but he heard it explode and then it stopped. And I didn't realize that one little piece of it had hit my head and my hair was burning. Ooh. And I didn't even care for my hands. I just didn't want that instrument. And I just brushed it. You know, sometimes you just go through something and you don't get touched by it. But my head actually got burned. And it actually, I realized, it's holy fuck. And I still have that scab back there. And, you know, Frank said, like about 1 minute later, ready to play again? and I just couldn't believe how me personally, I remember one time I got beat up in Pau, France. And
on tour
by these paratroopers. Me and Peter Wolf went out one night, and I got beat. And I don't think I'll go there with Peter for a second. But anyway, I get back to the hotel, and the roadies are like putting me out for bait so they can catch this bastard, this paratrooper. And Frank says, "What's going on here?" And I was limping because I had my ankle get crushed on a curve. The cat just stomped it, and there was like 8 of them. All they wanted was to kill. You know what I mean? Just put out a little steam. Anyways, Frank says, what's with you? And I says, well, I just got beat up, man. He says, well, what was it like? And I told him,
Oh,
he says,
the light.
he said,
There's the anthropologist.
I wouldn't go there. But the thing what he said to me to kill me was, well, next time carry a knife. And I said, Frank, if they saw the glint of steel, I wouldn't be here. And he just smiled, this weird look at me. You know?
He was working on you.
He was working on me, right?
Now here's the thing. Jerry brings up this quote that he's puzzled by, or he likes it. Frank says, "I don't believe in trying to have love. I take love as assumed, and I want to go beyond love." Maybe that's his data concept of marriage, but he wants to get into the beyond. Become a machine, but it can be very anthropomorphic, or human satisfaction getting beyond trying to. In other words, don't take things personally, is what Frank's saying in the band. Don't take it personally. We're working our ass off here, and we don't. You don't need my praise, he's saying.
But let me qualify this.
Okay.
Don't take it personally. But I'll tell you one thing. He would salivate when someone would take it personally for entertainment reasons.
That's right.
I mean, whenever there was the little sore thumb in the band, whether it was Arthur or Nectar, or Scott Tunis, you know what I mean?
That's how he'd be the music.
It was like he would just put these pieces on the chess table, man.
He'd test you. That's what I mean.
And he would just love it. He would love it.
But that's what I mean. He was testing you to see how much you could take it personally and not freak out and not be Jeff Simmons and leave the band.
When you say this love as taken,
granted,
taking it for granted there, and then let's just leave that part of the equation there and see what's beyond this. That is such a deep thought, man, because our perception of things, as many of us believe, is an illusion. It's merely our perception of things versus what it really is.
Yeah.
You know, I had this thought one night about 5 years ago. I'm out on the grass someplace in the valley, and it was a particularly clear night. And I look up, and I could see, for LA, a lot of stars. And the thought came to me, Bob, that when it's dark, actually, when it's light out,
and nighttime now?
No.
When it's day.
In other words, I was seeing the stars, and I studied astronomy, and I loved it. That's my real clock, is the sky.
Right.
But in the daytime, when the sun is shining, and I can see those glasses, and I can see that that's white, and I see my view because of the way the sun is.
Yeah.
I'm comfortable with that, and I think that this is my world.
Yeah.
I think this is it, and the sun is illuminating everything in me and showing me that. But in the nighttime, when it's dark, and I can't see anything, then I get a chance to see what it really is.
Right.
Because it's dark, and then I see, holy Christ, this is the moon. You can't see the moon in the day unless it's
blinded by the
flashlight. You can't see the stars.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You've seen 100
and it opened my mind up to my perception of things is really an illusion. It just hit me like that. And what Frank was saying about love is a given, and then let's find out what this thing is.
Get rid of the sun. Let's make the water turn black. You know, that's the night.
Bingo.
The night, then the long night of the iron sausage. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right, man. And it turns you around to think that our perception of love, which is sort of a common denominator, it's, to me, you can never love enough, but if you always love at one level, or you give it too much power, you never see what's beyond love. And I'm treading on treacherous ground here.
Yeah, that's
but I like that. I like being on the edge.
The envelope here.
And Frank, Frank, I would never say was a loving person.
Right.
Frank, even to himself, wasn't a loving person.
Right.
But love manifested itself with him in his quest. There was the knowing of the mystery was Frank's love.
And knowing that the universe works, even though he seemed to destroy every system or some way of looking at it, he still had faith. That's the deeply religious kid that was in him, the real Catholic, you know what I mean? He got insulted by the perversion of this mystical thing as a kid that the regular society, the Vatican, which was his enemy, really perverted. He said once in one of his books, it might have been once on being a Catholic, Peter Archer Grossman's book, he talks about, he really gets pissed off that there are kids who have grown up in this world and they have a mystical thing, and then when it doesn't jive with the adult world, and then that leads to
Bam.
schizophrenia and all kinds
Any
of
kind
things.
of pathological thing, sure.
And he was able to keep his childlike innocence and mystery, and he had a faith. He was really describing God, updating God. That's what he was
Updates.
doing. Volcanelli,
That's right.
Alchemy.
Mhm.
He was updating it for us. Now okay, so you were, well, we get sidetracked. What were you, you're looking at the dark, okay. And Frank always worked in the night generally, in the early years, at the night. So what would you develop on that? Do you want to say more about your vision?
No, but it was just, the main concept was just that what we see as our reality is many times limiting us because it's an illusion.
Right, now that's a cliche of philosophy, but the point is that the magician comes in with a new way to show you the illusion that you're not even aware of, that it's been further sophisticated by Rumpelstiltskin, you know what I mean?
Let me just qualify that when I say that this illusion that that the spoon feeding of sunlight and clarity that we see our perception of things, yes, to me that is an illusion. It's a mindset of our planet, but to get beyond that and see that you have to be not afraid to have your eyes closed, man, and just go in the dark, because that is where it really is. Then you can see what's important. Go for the dark. Then the light that's there is light in dark.
Now this.
Hold it, I'm getting dangerous here.
No, this is good.
I'm getting dangerous.
But you're quoting. Let me tell
Jerry?
you. Let me tell you who you're quoting. Is that it's exactly right, and Frank had that. And so who in the 60s was the guy saying go blind? His metaphor for going into the dark. Frank was operating. That's the big no concept, or the conceptual continuity. So he looked for it to manifest so he could use. So who shows up in the late 60s writing poetry saying we should all be blind? We should make the water turn dark. Jim Morrison.
Jim, baby.
And who does he want to put into Captain Beefheart versus the White People? The late 60s is Grace Slick and Jim Morrison. He would take, it's like, he would take someone who was saying to him, and he would then push it further than they realized.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's what you're getting. You're getting close to describing what Frank did, what he did. That's why he took all media. He took all sensory data.
Well, you know what? Let's even you started talking about. Am I interrupting you?
No. Am I interrupting you to it?
Yes. No.
You get dangerous. Let's make the kitchen dangerous and what dangerous.
You say that and Frank loved to work in the dark.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a great illusion.
Yeah. It's an illusion.
It's but that many people have. Yes. He many times
You mean
woke
a
up.
illusion or
No,
IL? Yeah.
In illusion, because it wasn't that way. Many times Frank would be working at 7 in the morning.
I know. I found out later.
His biological
He would
clock
go
kept
naturally.
going past the international date line so many times. It was all what's the word? It was all. Well, whatever.
Cyclic. He writes in the Bob Marshall interview in '88. He talks about the whole importance of cyclic rates. He lived the cyclic. He wouldn't let the society interrupt with his cyclic feelings.
Right, and it all hinged upon what he was working on, and he would just take his time to sleep, and when he was tired, he would just sleep, and so he would.
He actually wasn't living in nature. See, that's
totally,
funny.
man.
He wasn't
totally
living in nature. He was nature, but he
was his nature.
He took advantage of all the services that man had made at that point.
That's right.
That he could not have to worry, because a person in the medieval period had to go to sleep when it got dark. There was no light, and they had to get up.
Yeah.
So Frank was really living in the beyond in terms of the most advanced effects one could do as a yogi in the technological environment.
That's totally right. Even in terms of lack of sleep for 36.
Right. You go for a day and a half straight.
42 hours. You
guys would be sleeping, right, and coming in and out.
I can remember just sleeping on that couch in there.
Oh, you'd stay there?
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah. Oh, you bet.
You had to.
You betcha.
And he'd still be working while you're sleeping.
For a man that did no drugs, you know what I mean, and just he was driven, man. And I've never met anybody like that.
No,
I didn't know
that there were driven people like that.
I didn't know Beethoven.
Yeah,
I didn't.
You met him though. You met him. You fucking met him. That's my point. Is that he was the greatest composer. He was the driven artist, and he and Beefheart knew that, and they would describe their concepts. There was a great quote by Beefheart, or one of them, saying, I don't believe that Mozart was this refined guy that the Academy teaches.
Yeah.
He was, and Beefheart described himself, he was a wild man.
Total wild
You
man.
know, and he had that energy. And the counterculture magazines about 969, Miles, the British guy who would do these great interviews, the first great interviews with Zappa, he had a picture of Zappa, the profile, and he looked just like Beethoven. That's what really, I said,
Oh,
this
yeah.
guy's Beethoven, you know? And then
But I go along with you with Mozart.
Yeah, he was a wild man.
Yeah.
But no, it's not that they were silly and irresponsible.
No.
They had a manic, they were in
They were
touch
driven,
with
man.
because they were in touch with the present and the implications of the present. I mean, was it Beethoven celebrating Napoleon? Then he found out that Napoleon fucked up. And he said, okay, fuck that. Because it's not that this is a precious piece of music. The news changed.
Right.
You got to change the music. He's not operating on some abstract principle. He's responding to the present.
Well,
and it's political.
Yeah, you know, like there's a sonata of Beethoven that it's called Les Adieux and then / Les Bevels. And
What does that mean?
In other words, when Napoleon let go of the troops, it was dedicated to that, and Beethoven respected him. You know what I mean? But when he turned around,
Les Adieux,
which means the goodbye.
Okay.
But it's like then he got really pissed off when Napoleon did the nasty, and he changes it to Les Bevels, which is like
that's German.
Yeah, it means sort of like later. You know what I mean? Get out of here. You know.
Later, buddy.
It means it's goodbye, but another tone of it. You know what I mean?
And it's like an unsentimental, a mean goodbye.
A mean goodbye.
But get out of here,
motherfucker.
Right. So that's a yin yang right there in the
Totally.
So les Oda, that word is a German word. It sounds like
Les Bevels. Yeah.
No, the first word.
Les Adieux is French.
Yeah, it's French.
Right.
So French German.
Yeah, exactly.
Then there's even the linguistic metaphor
with a
there,
nationalistic kind of thing. Yes.
Now
And it's a great sonata too.
Right. Okay. We're talking about this Beethoven energy, the present. You never met a driven man. There was a thought I was going to do. I'm going to switch tracks.
All right.
In light, I think we've done enough to do into this. What was he driven about, and the fact that he was operating in the invisible realm, the beyond realm, which was neither man or machine. You know, it was whatever the situation. Well, it was machine, but he had a detachment, so he could use both senses and and computer senses. Okay, so do we have the Bob Marshall thing, the Pauline Oliveri quote?
No, I'll get it.
Okay, you get that, but I'm going to read this. Look at this section. This is Frank talking. Look at this as symbolic. He's describing his work, his life. The piece, meaning his whole life composition. The piece was made from Synclavier digital dust, which is a technical term, but look at the dust. Remember Beefheart, the dust flows forward, the dust flows back. It's hard to explain, but when you look at the G page, G-spot tornado, but this is a technical term. Do you know about these terms? Is this after your time with the Synclavier?
No, I'm familiar with this.
The G page on the Synclavier, you'll see note names and numbers, but that's not all that lives on a track. Think of the beyond of your theme.
Subterranean information. Thank you
There's
very
subterranean information which can only be viewed when you go out of the user-friendly, the love zone.
That's right. The secure.
The secure.
Mommy nipple.
Dave Coronado. He wasn't into taking risks. The first mothers. You know. Okay. You go out of the user-friendly part of the machine and the mysterious world of XPL programming, which is a technical thing, right? But he means the hidden, subterranean. At that point, you can see these things that live on the track that are giving these secret instructions.
To the machine.
Yeah, to the machine. You're not even part of it.
You're now in on the artery of that machine, man.
Now,
watch out for that blood.
Think of Frank the conductor giving his secret instructions to you guys. You're the machine. Yet he's talking from the perspective of the guy, the central scrutinizer is watching this. And in the central, Joe's garage, the opening shows the little UFO object, but you can see the strings and the guy in the green shirt.
That's right, the puppeteer.
Yeah, think of Frank as a puppeteer, not as the guy who's talking to you and telling you what to do, because he's watching.
Because you know what? It's like when it says the subterranean area.
Right.
When the machine, you're inside that. It's like that is the biggest risk to take when you think about it, because you have to like get yourself into the mindset that you're in control, but you're not in control.
You're looking for what can show up.
What can you do that is going to make
the world talk back to you and then learn something or experience something new?
And that's a crucial point about us as part of the organic process as musicians with Frank. the same difference, only now
Yeah.
it was with a real machine.
Yeah.
You know,
And that's
it's a
why,
metaphor.
That's why it's not. It's like Ben Watson makes the point that, you know, with Duke Ellington you couldn't tell who was contributing, who not, and it's relevant. It's not. It's not important whether Frank was the creator and you were he was ripping you off. That whole argument that Don Preston and some of the old others
Pardon me,
make.
but I don't go for that. I mean, I'm not part of that certain philosophy. I never.
That's what I'm saying.
I knew up front. Frank told me up front. You won't be. You'll be
No
lucky.
credit.
You'll be lucky if you get any publishing working with
Right.
me. You'll be lucky if you get any songwriting. Yeah. So don't expect that. I take care of you, and you know. I knew that up front. And I remember my first year in the band. Terry Bozzio told me, Tommy, like, you don't have to give so much, man. And I couldn't damn help myself. You know what I mean?
He was actually warning you.
Terry
to
said,
hold back, hold back.
Terry told me to hold
Don't
back.
give so much. This guy's a monster. He'll get you.
And I didn't care because
Yeah.
at that point, you know, when I listen to the stuff that I'm on and that people that they know my signature in the band, that's all I was looking for,
Yeah.
man, at that point in my life. You know what I
And
mean?
you can tell these guys, they come up and they quote you, they know your signature stuff in Simpson Footwear and
Sure.
the other one.
Sure.
Yo Mama, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, they know you. You are known for that, and you're surprised that that's all they know about you is that. So
Yeah,
you do have your
right.
signature, you know what I mean?
That's right, and
Yeah.
I don't feel ripped off.
That's
I
right.
feel like
Well,
it was
I
a
understand. Let's
conservatory.
not get, that was the
Yeah,
thing was
yeah.
that I was just thinking, they did a retrospective of modern art at the Guggenheim, pop art. And the question that the Rauschenberg and Warhol came in, they questioned originality. They didn't even concern about being original. Warhol said, I want to be a machine.
Mm.
Don Preston is the previous World War II generation. He was way older than Frank, you know,
Mhm.
very old guy. They still were interested in that ego original modernist thing, not
Mhm.
postmodernist.
Mhm.
You are the later band being
Bang.
postmodern. Bang. Yeah,
Big bang.
Yeah. You being the later bang were of the big no, were more postmodernists, instinctively grew up later, were more passive in a sense, not worried about the ego and creating like that 19th century thing. You guys just wanted to dance and be part of the party,
That's
so to
right,
speak.
man.
Okay? So what happens is some people say the 80s band, they're just a machine compared to the eccentric individual personalities of the grandmothers and the previous mothers. But the point is the 80s band, as I tell Dave Wally, was the greatest bloody music
Fucking hey.
that was ever made, and you never heard it, Wally. You stopped going to concerts in '78, and you can only get a glimpse of it on the albums, the bootlegs, and those things that are great because they show you what went on every night. And that reminds you something that nobody knew about this band. This was incredible. If Frank was the greatest musician, what was it? We know that the culture establishment had to stop it, but I find it very interesting that they had to suppress Frank. They did not want anybody to know, and luckily Frank was able to still continue
That's right.
in the decentralized society.
That's right. He found the tributaries to paddle down.
Yeah, and he could keep doing it, and those who were lucky saw it. Every time I saw him, I said, this is a bloody UFO going on here. This is unbelievable, this band. You know what I mean? And everybody, even Coltrane, Coleman and anybody, they paled. And you had downbeat slugs on, talking about the latest jazz guys coming up, and all this political and musically correct stuff. And Frank, and you were part of that. That's the great experience, and that's why you didn't care about what credit you got. You wanted to be on the boat.
That's
the
right,
party,
man.
You know
That's
what I mean?
right,
And that
man.
was the privilege. Okay, let's go back to the
Not only that, I wanted to be fighting those lions.
That's
You
the
know,
warrior
it's part of a soldier.
You
know
wanted
what
to
I mean?
help.
I felt like I was a soldier with
Yeah.
Frank. In a new kind of
Post-music
game.
music.
In a new
Post-music, yeah, new
post-music
kind of game.
maybe.
Yeah.
And the thing is that it still amazes me
Yeah.
that people think of Frank in a musical realm.
That's right.
He is so far beyond even like spirituality. It's like this.
Well, what an artist does. An artist is
He was
a
an
scapegoat.
alchemist, for Christ's sake.
He was Christ. He was the second coming. He was the scapegoat martyr, acting out what the culture needs.
Yeah,
the purgative function.
Absolutely.
The Illinois Enema Bandit.
Yes,
he gave us the
right.
purgation.
Purge me,
Yeah,
baby. I'm
purge
grooving you.
I'm what you? What's the phrase? I'm pluking.
What?
Did you go? I'm pluking you?
I'm grooving you.
Oh, grooving you.
No, pluking. I wouldn't want to quote Frank on that realm.
Now, Bob Marshall did the greatest interview. As soon as it went 3.5 hours, and after Frank says, I want to copy that, I'm going to put it out as an album. This interview surprised him in October 8. I don't know if you read it. But the point is, the first question Bob Marshall asks is, and it's the perfect question, it's the question that needs to be asked, what is music? In other words, you went back to square one because you had to realize that Frank may not be necessarily a musician.
Absolutely.
Right. So that triggered off. I'm very proud of that question. What
To
is
start an
music?
interview like that took balls, man.
Yeah, like what what are you? It's like I'm looking at an alien, or I'm an alien just talking to a human, going, what is this thing you humans do?
Right.
Which
What is
Frank
this
would-
laughter thing?
Yeah,
That's- What's that all
Why
about?
do you guys go like this? You know?
Yeah.
And Frank would love it because that was the sensibility he was as a puppeteer.
That's
Look,
brilliant, man.
Yeah, yeah.
That's totally brilliant.
Okay, so we're back into this. Okay, at that point you can see these things that live on the track that are giving. The things that live on the track is Frank, the conductor, giving these secret instructions to Tommy Mars and the band, telling it what to do, right?
Mhm.
Which was the whole rehearsal process and the training, and then the adaptation within every night with the different audiences.
Mm-hmm.
One classification of these secret instructions is something called G numbers in the computer,
Mhm.
which would be derived from plugging in a guitar. In other words, that was the effect of a technical gizmo you would do,
Yes.
you know what I mean?
Right.
Which is the metaphor, is the metaphor of Frank taking new technologies to alter the
Kind of like a boob
program.
job.
Right? That means what? A boob.
Like
Oh,
a-
you mean silicon? You
Yes,
know, yeah.
yes, exactly.
I forgot about the humans. Oh yeah, those guys. Yeah.
Yeah.
You mean tits? Well, I always remember Frank once mentioned about
Dollops of silicon.
somebody said something about tits, some woman to her, and he goes, "Well, you grew those things."
Right.
That's an alien. You grew them. You know, the girl never thought she grew them. I thought it was so original. They go, you grew them. What are you complaining about?
That's right.
As if you had a choice.
That's
Well, I'm not
right.
going to grow them. You know? So okay, it's like a boob job. You're saying it's the mutating of it,
Mhm.
a new technology, and he's studying. One classification of these secret structures is something called G numbers. That's a particular effect from a techno innovation. They have this guitar unit that you can plug in besides recording the note you play. He's always talking about what the other effect. Besides recording the note you play, it records a bunch of data in the form of G numbers. So we found a way to convert bunches of G numbers into note blanks. And G numbers occupy points in time. Note, Frank, is all about what time is it? That's his
Mhm.
main question.
Mhm.
They indicate that something happened. They indicate. We're trying to read what this subterranean thing is. They indicate. It's like I went into freakout culture, L.A. '65, and I'm trying to see what's happening
No,
to
this
them.
is intense. They
Yeah.
indicate that something
Something
happened
happened.
on the guitar string at a certain point in time. It takes a little piece of eternity and slices it up.
Which is Frank.
What is music? What is life?
What is the big note? It's all one composition. He's describing himself.
That's right.
And he's saying this computer is doing what he thinks he's doing, right? But he's watching the computer do it. It takes just to continue, it takes a little piece of eternity, slices it up,
Ooh.
and if your finger moved, there's a G number. You give your hand signal
Mhm.
that says what your finger did besides just playing the note. Isn't that
Yeah.
incredible? So we convert this dust, this is all dust stuff, you know what I mean? Into something that I could then edit for pitch, and the dust indicated a rhythm.
Mhm.
So what I did was take the rhythm of the dust, of the nothing, and impose a pitch data on the dust, and thereby move the inaudible G number into the world of audibility with a pitch name on it. That's how magnesium dress was built.
Mhm.
Now, with that in mind, that's he's doing that in the middle 80s. Yeah, that's the middle
84,
80s, yeah.
85.
Okay, now in this interview Bob Marshall did, Bob Marshall asked him, where I get the idea part, I'm asking about his idea part. I remember you did an interview in the LA Free Press in summer of '69, and you mentioned Pauline Oliveri. Are you familiar with her work?
No.
Okay. What would you say, Jerry? Classify
Avant-garde experimental composer.
of the '60s, like on the John Cage,
Still.
in the John Cage zone, right?
Still, yes.
Okay. And Frank mentions this interview in the interview in the LA Free Press, summer '69. After saying, the first guy opens up, says, your music is like Zap Comics, you know, R. Crumbs. He goes, oh yeah, he agreed totally with Zap Comics. But now he brings up this other point. Frank says, Frank mentions Pauline Oliveri's work with sound, where Pauline worked with above the audible and below, creating a mass in the middle. And I'm Bob Marshall saying, and you like that idea, Frank, and expand on this Pauline Oliveri idea. And he goes, not that it created a mass, it created something audible. It produced a sum and difference tone which happened to be located within the audible frequency range. By combining something so high you couldn't hear it, and something so low you couldn't hear it, and something so low you couldn't hear it, it yielded something in the middle that you could hear.
Right.
Reference back to this.
Mhm.
20 years later
Mhm.
almost.
Mhm.
Whether or not you like what you hear in the middle is another question. The concept is brilliant. Pauline Oliveri.
Just psychoacoustically, it's brilliant.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and a note, Frank already has his own intuitions. When he saw her, that gave him a signpost to
Mhm.
direct what he was already
Mhm.
intuiting. So it was useful to him. And so I go, yeah, because it showed you how physical reality is, or the way it is, right? And Frank goes, it's one aspect of it. And I go, are there other aspects you could talk about? if you buy the idea that the vibrational rates, think of Lumpy Gravy, those early vibrational themes, if you buy the idea that vibrational rates translate into matter, and then if you understand the concept of vibrational rates above perception and below perception combining to create a reality, that opens up the door to some pretty science fiction matter possibilities. Remember, you always want to do a science fiction Broadway musical.
Absolutely.
Think of the central scrutinizer of the image. If you can create an audible reality by a sine wave above the range of what your ear can hear, and another one from below, and you put them together and suddenly it creates something that your ear can detect, is it not possible that solid matter of an unknown origin could manifest periodically because of frequencies of some unknown nature above and below which for short durations manifest solid objects? It could explain a lot of strange things that people see. And then I go, or Bob Marshall says, UFOs come to mind immediately. Yeah. Now, that's the concept he's always working on in all his work. So what triggers off in your memory of conversations maybe approximating this? This is what we want evidence of.
Well, one thing that comes to mind immediately is I remember discussing a particular tour with Frank.
Now, what's the time? We need a timing on
time frame is
82?
I think around the early 80s, 81 or 82. I'm not certain, but
And
around that first.
You're off the road.
We're
You're
off
back
the
at
road.
home.
We're rehearsing.
Yeah.
And Bennett comes in, or whoever was giving the data for the tour itinerary,
Glotzer?
speaking.
Bennett
Could have been Bennett Glotzer, and it could have been Larry Griffith, whatever. And Frank says, we're doing a lot of theaters. And I says, oh, cool, sounds so great. You know, like the Fox Theater in Atlanta, or the Palladium, or whatever. You know, I particularly love theaters.
But you're discussing a tour coming up, not one that happened.
No, one that's coming up.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm saying, well, we'll have to do 2 shows, you know, type thing. And, yeah, I mean, we're talking. And Frank says, you know, though, I like playing those big arenas, Tommy. And I says, yeah, we only have to do 1 show, right? And he says, no, man, I like to move a lot of air.
Ooh.
And I said, oh, your guitar. And he said, yeah, those low notes. The air that moves with those low notes is like food, you know. And I just got that from a mere ego place, you know what I mean? Because it is powerful when you
can do that.
When you
Feel
can
the
actually
audience responding.
It's
right?
not even just the audience.
The environment, the climate,
the whole climate.
Your weather
man.
modification, man. That's what you're doing.
It's like kind of like doing a test rocket, and then doing like the real thing.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
and the versus that versus the. I don't quite know what I'm trying to say, but it's like the mass that's involved in that is so fulfilling, and so it stretches you, you know, because you're not part of just this environment of this concert.
That's a psychic effect, isn't it? It's physical. We're talking about the inaudible above and below.
It's totally
what he's talking about here.
Psychoacoustic effect.
That's why
man.
this evokes that. Now let me throw some.
So
okay.
Another thing that is very, very apropos to this conversation is Zappa as an orchestrator.
Yeah. You mean live conducting?
No. I mean
The
an
arranger?
I mean an orchestrator. An orchestrator is one who takes the written piece of a composer,
right,
and not necessarily arranges it, but in essence it is an arrangement of the instruments that will be used in this particular idiom. And
Tommy gets back up. He's way over the guys.
And let me say that. Let me say beyond anything, Frank was probably one of the most brilliant poets of an orchestra, and I say orchestra in the loose, the general large term. He had visions.
He was a satellite conductor.
It wasn't.
It was a satellite conductor.
He was
That's
right.
satellite.
That's right.
Yeah. That's what you're trying to
you
say.
know, Frank was like NASA, point nine.
Have you heard the music maker's document?
Let me finish this thought, if you will.
Yeah.
The way Frank uses instruments, like for instance, a contrabass instrument, or like say for instance, a contrabassoon.
Yeah.
And you have this swamp, Hades kind of like fiery, stenchful gunk of a bassoon down there, way down.
I mean, he made it like that, or that's a given?
This is a given.
Yeah,
the instrument's vocabulary is there.
Yeah.
with a piccolo up here. You know, I mean, up to the practically register.
Right.
And this is, I mean, in terms of just traditional instruments, I'm speaking, not what this is talking about in the mass grand
But
scheme
within
of things.
music,
But within the
he was
musical
doing that.
confines, he would do that. Or with my Taurus bass pedals, when he found out that I had a set of Taurus bass pedals, he never heard of those before. And I was trying to get a set of B3 pedals, voltage controlled at Manny's, and I walked in one day, this was still when I was in Connecticut, and they had a set of bass pedals. It was only an octave, but I said, holy shit, I don't even have to do any modification. I'll just buy these.
Jeez.
I had the first set in the world, actually. And they had just come in. And then when I joined the band, I already had my bass pedals. I'd been using them for a couple of years. He loved that low fucking C on that instrument.
Yeah.
He would just, and I would be so like wanting to, oh, this is bringing up another topic here
Good.
too, that he said, just hold that C, man. Just hold it. That's like an instrument before basses could go down to C's. Only synthesis could do that. And it's just like, I could have been a paraplegic doing it with my dick, just, you know, stomping that fucking note down. And in an arena, not outside in a stadium, that's just more people. But in an arena, in a sports box, the biggest place you could possibly be that's still confined. That feeling, man, it's like something else, UFO. You feel that. It's not something you know about or can have an expectation about. It's something that just happens. Who knows what occurs when these kind of frequency juxtapositions happen? We know in acoustics, Bob, that when two notes are simultaneously played together, we have a combination tone that occurs. Right. When they're at mass extremities like that, the potential for any kind of physical manifestation of that can be exponentially increased because of the distances. And I think that Frank, in a traditional sense of orchestration, used that, but in a farther sense of an experiential, just challenging our version of nature, he was on the verge of something, man. He was totally on the verge of something.
Okay,
when he would tell the guys from Ensemble Moderne to have these priceless French horns, rub those bastards against the floor. They do it. And who knows why Frank was, he knew, you know, he valued instruments. I remember times when I would burn holes in the keyboard and he'd notice it 3 years later and said,
he'd find you.
But the fact is that he was doing that for a reason. Sure, the sonic value was there, but there was something else, and it wasn't a sadistic thing. He was searching for this thing, man.
He had gone into the electrified, see, you know, we have sound and then you have recorded sound. That's a not new way of sound. So he worked in the interval between natural sound and recorded sound, plus the effects of doing them together in the architectural 20th century environment. Therefore, he was molding. Now, I want to show you this. You're supporting what my thesis is. Frank was a satellite conductor. That was the unconscious and unconscious, and you can see it as a motif all the way through. What is the first thing he builds in Studio Z? A rocket ship. And you started saying things that totally, I'd have to re-listen to the tape. You started sparking off references point, you know, accidentally. You go, Frank was like building a rocket ship, but it's like, you're not in the rocket ship, but you go out there. You said that whole thing, you get out there on the moon. Well, that, if you read his description in the Little Ontario Daily Report, which we were reading, he's being interviewed about his movie called Just Captain Beefheart at that point, and he's got the satellite, the studio's a satellite, and Billy Sweeney wants to create a rocket to get to the moon. He wants to do the impossible. Think of later, 30 years later, why not? The impossible was part of his logo. So he's trying to do the impossible. He's Vulcan and he's doing alchemy. But now, in 1978, in May 78, archival memory, in Downbeat, he did this incredible interview where he talked about moving around the air as sculpture. Think of Beefheart as his image of a great sculpture, a parallel reference point for him as Beefheart, the genius sculpture kid. He wants to make air sculpture. Now, you never read that interview, I guess. You're on the road too busy, but he says it to you 3-4 years later. But when some people read that, I remember meeting guys from the 60s, and they phased out of Frank during the Turtle section or something. You know, people phased in and out.
Sure.
And he said, I didn't like Frank in the early 70s, middle 70s, but when they didn't hear his music. When I read the Downbeat interview, I knew that guy was a genius.
Right.
And they got back into him, which then gets into the compositions he made in interviews. Okay. Now, you have this sculpture moving. Then, on the Music Makers, he says, he says, the lawyer says Frank had ridiculous dreams. Like he said, we got to get our own satellite. And Larry says, well, that costs $500 million. And Frank says, no problem, we'll do it. And that was that. And then Van Carlson comes over the night, and he tells us, I brought up that story. He says, well, you know, I was in, when we went over in January 90 to Moscow, we went to the bureaucrat of Goss Film. And I don't know if you know this, and he said Frank's, the guy was bragging about their new satellite going up. So Frank, jumping on the president, said some things, and the guy says, we can offer you a satellite. He actually pulled it off, and it was going to be CNN. Right. You know what I mean? Not CNN. And he was going to do it. And so I don't know when he told Larry that cost $400 or $500 million, but let's assume it's before they got the cost from this lawyer guy. I think his name's Larry. He didn't know maybe what Van Carlson experienced. That this bureaucrat actually was. Frank knew he had faith, Catholic faith, whatever that faith is, that he could find it, even though it cost $500,000. And life led to him. The wall goes down. He ends up in Moscow. He's talking to the Goss Film bureaucrat.
Everything, all the pieces start fitting together.
Right. And the bureaucrat, he energized. He just thought it'll happen.
Right.
Think it'll happen. And then the Goss Film guy says, oh, we got a great satellite going up and blah, blah, we don't know what to put on it.
Guess what?
Yeah.
You're looking at the new pilot, baby.
Now look at that's like 92, and it's 90, but it's almost 30 years from 62.
Right.
And he's still working with satellite. Now you look at, he goes, some like it hot, some like it cold in Pajama people. He wasn't very aware of McLuhan's writings, but Marshall wrote about the satellite conductor using hot media and cold media, whole industrial phase, and then the software phase, the modern and the postmodern, and the satellite conductor, satellite government, the White House is the front, the red herring for the real satellite. So the secret instructions, Frank was imitating in that, and I call that the satellite conductor. That's why he could use conspiracy information, paranoia information to fit into the secret instructions level.
Absolutely, man, because he was just mocking it.
He was mockulating. Nobody knows, and I'll have to take credit for this. I'm the one who's saying he's satellite conductor. You're confirming from your own experience that that's what he was.
No doubt.
And I'm saying it for the first time. I got the word. He's the satellite conductor, and he's imitating. And that's why he was so proud when he went to NASA. He met a guy from NASA, and I think they showed him some landing, the Voyager stuff. He would always want to be.
Oh yeah, I remember because he gave me the pin when they went to Saturn. When he went up to JPL, he actually gave me his pin of that particular expedition.
Yeah, that they gave him.
I saw it there, and I said, oh my God, that's beautiful. He said, just take it. Yeah. Frank was like that sometimes. He'd give you shit.
There's a generosity.
Like when Warren Cucurullo came out on the New Year's Eve concert when we played Polly.
Right.
And Warren stayed over at his house. He said, wow, that's a beautiful sitar, Frank. And Frank, the kid wasn't even in the band at this point. Up to that point, Warren was always the quintessential fan.
Right.
You know, whenever we played the play.
He's at the beginning of Baby Snakes.
Correct.
Right, yeah.
And when Frank gave him that sitar, I said, in 6 months. He said, okay. Yeah. Sure enough, I think it was 4 months. But the
in
fact
other words,
he
wouldn't be generous. Now the point is that he's generous, but he also knew intuitively that this guy should be given something because he's probably going to work for Frank eventually.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So I think when I heard Frank or Gail,
he was like that with so many people too. When you least expected it, and that goes too with giving praise. When you least expected it, and most likely needed it.
Yeah.
That's when you got
Maybe he was intuitive. He knew.
He was fucking intuitive. Yeah. Oh, definitely, man. That's an understatement.
Yeah, and Gail was interviewed by Howard Stern just sometime after Frank died, and she was talking, and the normal Stern, silly, pornographic kind of talk. And then at the very end, the closing statement by Gail was, Frank was a very. You hear it. It's audio.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's not on TV. Yes, audio.
I'd love to.
You probably have that, Jerry?
No.
Okay, so, but anyways, Gail goes...
I've never heard Gail in an interview.
Okay, so Gail at the end, her closing remark says, you're thinking, okay, this is the widow, she's sad and whatever, and you have different public images of Gail, different public images of Frank, plus you know what other people think of them, and then you hear Gail goes, he was such a kind person. It was like she was talking like a social worker about a client. She goes, he was such a kind person for Howard, he wouldn't believe it. Now, I know the people, he was considered an asshole, a mean guy, but the point is, now what he's orchestrating is the love, the anthropomorphic, the nice guy, but also the media was this violent monster coming at us. He had to be mean dealing with the monster. He's orchestrating hot and cold, and some like it hot, some like it cold, but Frank could be both, and he come out accidentally with his associates, could do it at the right time when the person needed the hot. He's working with physical reality above and below consciousness, which
That's
is the
right.
satellite environment. It's an invisible, inaudible
That's
environment.
right. That's right.
You see how much his life makes sense in that concept?
Entirely.
Isn't that?
Entirely. And to bridge those gaps, you know, that mass
Yeah.
of spectrum there is just phenomenal. And, you know, like what you said about Gail, it's almost like a social worker.
Yeah.
It was like, yeah, we understand.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
It's-
Or no, she was like not involved with him, just observing. You know,
That's what I mean.
Yeah, very
that's
detached.
right.
Yeah.
But to end an interview like
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
man,
It was that was interesting to hear that. And then
It's actually very fitting too, because there's no like big accolade or big eulogy. It's
Right.
just like
it was a
this is what
puzzle
it-
to her. She says, "This guy was nicer than me." Yet normally the woman is the better half.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
so this sort of, you know,
But
the
when, the
Italian
truth,
archetype,
when
yeah.
truth comes out,
Yeah,
at the
yeah,
end,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
funny.
But she's saying, you know, this guy was more of a woman than me. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Mhm.
And she was puzzled. And in The Music Maker, she talks about the day Frank died, and they take a toast when he's going out or something. Beverly D'Angelo, I think, says this, and she says that Gail says, "Thanks for the great life." But it was like, thanks for the fucking great play you put on.
Yeah,
You know,
right,
there was a
right.
funny way of detachment, like, this is the Rumpelstiltskin goblin guy who came into our lives, a UFO, and just the way, the detachment, he's dying when she says, thanks for the great life we had, or that you created. I maybe it's we had. But isn't that funny that Frank created that effect? But that's
Yeah.
because he was operating beyond the love, beyond, he was he was an angel in a sense, beyond the perception.
But Frank picked his players, you know. Gail was picked for a reason.
Oh yeah, and I thought you meant musical. Yeah, it was all
I'm
theater.
talking about the
no,
play,
the theater
man,
of his
the
life,
play,
Moon
the
Unit.
play.
People, that's why. This is outrageously non-sentimental, mean, Frank, to call your kids Dweezil and Moon Unit. But they didn't know he was operating beyond the love sentimental point, and it was
It
a
makes
play.
so much sense to me. I can't even.
As we're talking.
No, it
Well, in
always
retrospect,
made sense.
you
to me.
understood.
It always made sense.
Well, I would say that you, in some ways, you can't say this, but you had a special relationship because you brought, you see, Ben Watson makes the point that third stream jazz, Gunther Schuller, you know, they were combining classical and jazz was the in thing in the 50s. But Frank was taking the new drug of the masses, rock, and he was making classical and combining classical and rock, or third stream classical, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
The point is, he had to have a guy who could do that, and you were the guy.
Oh,
and
no
you were
doubt about it.
Italian.
No doubt.
And
Oh yeah, no
and-
doubt about it.
And you actually, you know, you were that part of Frank that went to school, learned all
You
this
got
stuff.
it. You got
you
it,
were the
man.
mirror.
You are the first person that ever said that to me.
And you
that's
knew
how
it?
I always felt. I always
You
felt
knew.
like that.
You were-
Because, man, the things that I heard in my head, before I joined Frank's band, I knew two songs, Peaches and Regalia and King Kong. That's all I knew.
You're right.
Because I had a band with Ed Mann in the Berkshires, and we played those two songs. I knew nothing of his
You were
music at
Frank,
all.
see?
And yet, when I came to him, and I heard the stuff that he was doing, it was exactly the chords I had been hearing, the juxtapositions of melodic motifs, the contrapuntal stuff, the odd time. It was all like, whoa, there's a cat on this planet that thinks, not exactly, but very similarly. So it was just like these two pieces of the
Yeah.
puzzle just coming right
He
together.
couldn't have done after Lather. He blopped everything out on Lather. Were you on any of the pieces on Lather? Is
Yeah,
that-
I'm
Yeah, that's on that 70s. That's a bit of 77 in it. Did
yeah,
you come in May
a-
77?
absolutely.
But that was he dropped it and he moved. And what's really, you would say to you, a very important point. He put out Lather 77, and then in early 78 on tour, he started to do the cells and germs and change his whole thing. You
Mhm.
didn't have to be a robot anymore.
Mhm.
But I bet you it was due to you because you could expand. You brought in a whole new spectrum. You brought in a new thing, and he couldn't have done that without someone like you. For his
Well, he would have
classical-
done something else. But I think I think he
Now
picked-
that's a good point. He could have done something else,
Because
but
the
it
way
wasn't
that-
to be done. What had to be done is what was done, and that's
Right.
why you showed up.
and then it just built and built and
Yeah.
built. I mean, that was a unit, man. That
Oh,
whole-
your band? You mean
Yeah,
that band, that time,
particular
that time
band,
zone?
That was the strong band, man. You know.
Yeah. Well, I remember seeing you guys. I saw you at UCLA. I saw you in September, end of September, Toronto,
when
77.
when Ike joined the band, Vinny.
Was that
Arthur-
before September 77?
No, that was a Terry Bozzio band, September '77.
Then they come in by January 78?
No, I believe it was a little bit later than that.
But in
But
78.
in 70, oh, yeah, it was
yeah,
the 78
78.
band, sure. I forget when auditions, you know, that part of my mind, it just blanks out.
You were so
when I was-
involved in learning.
Yeah,
You were,
it was
you
just
were
like
absorbing.
another audition, blah, and it was so, it was
But
actually
see-
kind of like hit or miss with Terry and Patrick were sort of coming back.
Right.
And they didn't, you know, like Terry, I remember when Terry quit the band, all he could say was, I don't know what to say.
He said that?
Yeah, yeah. It says I don't know what to say, man.
You mean
And
he
didn't
know why?
He didn't know why, but he knew he had to blow. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And he didn't really have anything to go to. And I think Patrick sort of did it, sort of because Terry was doing it. I
Right,
never.
that's the '78 shift that he didn't jump into. You're saying?
Right.
Yeah, he's
right.
part of that '77.
And I often wonder what that band would have been if those guys decided not to jump ship.
Right.
Because that was a very powerful thing. Although it was predictable, every night was the same. What would have come out of that, you know? And I think Frank needed a new chemical kind of configuration.
Okay, let me say this before I forget. I saw him in Toronto in September '77, then in L.A. in November '77.
That's right.
At the Poly Pavilion.
Poly Pavilion. Then
Yeah.
we played Poly again that year at the midnight show.
You mean later in the year, or
The-
later that
well,
night?
it would have been
day?
it would have been 70. It would have been 78 at that point,
Oh,
because
yeah.
it was midnight of the new year.
Right,
so,
right.
So that was actually the first
Yeah.
day of. Yeah.
Okay, now what is the concept? Tom Snyder and the Spiders from Mars.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any reference? Is there something? Can you really? Is Mars is in the group by that time?
Well, the thing started with Manx Needs Women,
Right.
and then it turned into Mars Needs Women, which is the
So it
movie.
was you.
So he changed it for me, yeah, and then
What's the movie? Mars Needs Women.
Mars Needs Women. Don't you remember that sci-fi movie?
Oh, it's not you. It's
no,
not
but,
about you.
No, but the song
But
originally was Mars Needs Women, and then there was this guy Manx or something.
Right, it became Manx Needs Women.
But then when we did it again, it was Mars Needs Women, because I joined the band. You
And
know
then did
what I
that become the Spiders from Mars? That's the,
Well-
I saw the bootleg. Maybe it's an erroneous title. Tom Snyder and the Spiders from Mars. Isn't that right, Jerry? You know?
Yeah, that's a little complicated. It was the TV show Frank was doing with Tom Snyder. He said Spiders from Mars. So
I don't think
it
there's
could
any.
be
I
no
think, it's just,
connection there.
I think it's just a coincidental thing.
But it's purposeful to bring up because now we're finding out that Mars, that Manx Needs Women, refers to Mars.
But it
Needs
really
Women.
started off as Mars Needs Women. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's where Frank got the illusion.
Because it was
from.
about you?
No.
He was reminded.
It was a movie, and then he changed the name to Manx Needs. I didn't know this guy Manx,
So it has nothing to do with you.
but a little bit by the fact that when we did it again, it became Mars Needs Women again.
Oh, he went back to
He
the
went
title.
back to Mars Needs Women.
Oh, and that's late in '78 later, and it's not
on 78.
It's not an official song title.
Right, and I think part of that Tom Snyder allusion is from Spiders of Destiny.
Right, yeah.
You know, because we were rehearsing that song as well. So that was just like, a lot of times Frank would just like these little motivic things,
Yeah.
either literally or musically or sociologically, they would just bleep in. You know what I mean? We have
Yeah.
lingo.
But they fit. See,
Yeah.
he wrote Finnegan's Wake.
And you guys have no clue, man, about how late night television would enter rehearsals. Like, we would put ourselves
You
in
mean
fucking
from the night before?
Yeah, like for instance, it could have
Yeah.
been Tom Snyder one
Yeah.
night. But you know, when we get off rehearsals, we go home, watch TV, or go
Yeah.
over to Frank's house, watch TV,
Right.
and like one thing that was most people would never know. But you remember that show Fernwood Tonight?
Oh yeah, I liked it. Martin Mull.
Or Mary Hartman,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
preceded
yeah,
it.
Yeah.
It was just like, you know, some people wouldn't think that Frank was kind of like a quote soap opera type
Or a
type of guy.
mainstream TV consumer.
That's the word I'm looking
Yeah,
for, right?
Yeah.
But we would discuss what happened on Mary Hartman.
After watching it.
After watching it, and matter of fact, the Fernwood theme song we would play a lot. It never got recorded, but this was in the rehearsal phase of that particular period. And, you know, it used to be just so funny how things from those shows or something that was in the news, it would just be like
See, that's
lingo
the
that
media.
popped in, and it was just like some little
That's the
chemical
satellite.
thing.
See, he was the I don't know if he did it consciously, but it was just his lifestyle allowed him to monitor the media and the pop culture. He's studying what he called ethnic folk, retrieving the
Ethnic
classical
folk.
music. You know,
That's
ethnic folk.
exactly right. And
he-
revamping it, recycling it.
And he'd be watching it, and the point is, he was the guy, the central scrutinizer, processing the live news of
Mhm.
every day. And his
Well, that was
dream-
later on when CNN.
But
Then
no,
it became that.
No, I was just going to say that, but he was already doing it from 1955
Oh,
on.
fucking
You know,
A!
watching it, putting it into his concept.
You
Now here's
bet.
the thing.
Ernie Kovacs,
He
man.
wanted to do a TV show, according to when the Mothers broke up in '69. He wanted to do a TV show right then, and he tried it in '97. It didn't happen. So then he's watching it, and he had the night school. You know, that
Yeah.
whole thing in the
Right.
late '80s.
Right.
He was already ready to do it.
Oh,
Because, and you know that Tom
Oh, baby.
Van says that he has stuff in the vault. He taped panels. He was creating all through the '80s stuff for that TV show.
Mhm.
But the point is, he wanted to create he wanted to be ZNN to CNN, or even before that, Johnny Carson, Johnny Zarson versus Johnny, because he knew that was the real molding of people's consciousness.
When Frank proposed that to me, man, I was so enthralled. That could have been.
You mean the night school? If that had happened?
Ooh, when he said, Tommy, you're my Paul.
Oh,
and I said, I have always wanted to do that. And Frank knew any moment I could just do anything for him. It was such a perfect thing. That was the Forum, national TV.
Jeez.
It was just like everything that I'm sure that he wanted at that time.
That was his final.
And how quickly that absolutely neutralized. It was so cruel, you know what I mean?
That's right.
And then
but the conspiracy knew.
And then
the conspiracy.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
yes,
they
that's
knew.
what it was.
It's all spelled out in this. We talked about it in the interview here.
But the euphoria that was going on for those 4 days.
As it started to happen.
For those 4 days.
I remember.
Man,
listen, holy fuck.
Man, I almost couldn't like keep my feet.
You couldn't take it. You had won the lottery.
I had won the big cosmic lottery.
Yeah.
And Frank, the eyes that he would give me, you know, like it was just like, man.
That would have been the ultimate composition. You know what I mean?
And you know what? It's just like inches in seconds. That stuff.
Yeah.
It wasn't.
You mean when you're doing it, or in terms
of
of
realizing it, having it actually come to fruition? You know, those things. It's just like.
But that's where the secret
phone
calls were made.
Yeah, I
the
know.
secret NBC, whatever network, where they were calling the White House. Everybody said, "This can't be happening." You know what I mean? And they might have said, "We're going to do it." They go over to call Frank. The other line rings. What's this? What's the White House? You can't fucking do that.
You want to know something, man? From that concept, I never asked Frank this question. It always puzzled me. Why, in fact, did he had to be subservient to American television? Why we couldn't have taped those shows over in England or Germany or anywhere? You know
because
what I mean?
America was the big note. It was a global culture.
Yeah.
It was the thing that went, nothing matters until it gets into the
American system.
Dan Rather on the news.
Yeah.
Now look at the metaphor of having Daniel Shore. They have the
yeah,
you know
no kidding, man.
He's got to have
tight with Frank. Yeah.
Then why was he's a guy who, like many other people in the music industry, were involved with Frank a lot more than Daniel Shore. But why did Daniel Shore have the special importance? Because he was the mirror image of Dan Rather.
There you go.
There you go.
Brilliant, Bob. Brilliant. I've often thought that. Man. That is so brilliant.
That is the everybody was a player. Gail was a player. What was the phrase? Everybody was a player.
That's right.
And not just a musical player. In this,
a player,
this
man. In this fucking play.
He was Shakespeare. Frank was.
I have used that quote. I have actually
that's
used
your
that.
idea.
That was my total idea.
And I didn't know it, so we both meet.
I've actually used that in quotes before. Hey, Jerry, could we take a quick time out for me to evacuate?
Yeah.
And how about we must be near the end anyways.
No, let's let them pause and go for the break.
How much more minutes we got?
They had the porta potty right there.
Yeah.
And like I go into the goddamn thing, and it's just like this place is packed. These people are sitting on fucking ice, waiting for us.
Yeah.
Just reverently screaming. You know what I mean? And I go into right before showtime. I had to take a fucking dump so bad. I go in there, and this porta potty has shit mounded up to a point above where they sit.
Yeah.
The glass guy probably squatted. Last couple of guys squatted up. The shit was actually coming up like a little cone above.
You're getting this on tape? Yeah.
And I could, Jerry.
Well, no,
so
you have last
go into it.
Who gives a fuck?
No, it's true.
So anyway,
down in France.
I go in there.
Down in France. Yeah.
That's right when we were writing in France.
That story. What you're telling influenced him?
No doubt about it.
So what'd you do?
So anyway, I go up to it and I look at it. I said, and I said, right when we were right ready to go on stage, and I said, Frank, I gotta take a shit, man. It's incredible because we had a long powwow before the gig.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I screamed bloody. I said, "What the fuck?" You know what I mean? And Frank says, "What's going on in there?" I says, "Come up here and look at this." So he goes in and he says, "Oh my God!" He says, "I'm not taking a shit in here until we get a new potty, Frank. And I've got to go. I can't do it. You know, if I start singing, it's just gonna come right out."
Yeah.
Anyway, he says, "Boy, I see what you mean. Sure, Tommy, no problem." So the show had to get held about 20 minutes. They had to find a potty out there and bring it in. It was
they're yelling.
Horrendous.
Were
but
people
it was
yelling?
But you mentioned. Oh yeah, they were. But it was.
They were
It was
getting mad.
reverent. No, they weren't getting mad. They
It
were
was
just
okay.
anxious.
It's just you want to help them, but you got to do this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the fact is, you talk about, that was a quick dump. this was like the dump of like Olympian record proportions. It was flip, flap, flap, blam, showtime.
Properly, right?
Oh no, it was clean sphincter control. I think it was just like a perfunctory.
Oh, you're lucky.
A perfunctory wipe. It just bam, it happened.
You have those lucky wipes. Sometimes you
bet.
have a
Sometimes
messy
you don't.
wipe.
Sometimes you don't.
they cut off clean.
Right. That's what this was, man.
You were lucky. You had a clean cut off. This is on tape. This is a good Al. This is Lumpy gravy talk.
But you mentioned
you had
that
a
was
clean
sphincter. Absolutely, man.
So you can do it in three.
But that was
3 wipes.
You know, like
you know what I mean?
I was sort of a
3 toilet paper wipes, right?
Oh, it was only one, baby.
Oh,
it was just
that's
so
unheard of, Tommy. You were possessed.
No, I am very.
Oh, you know how to do it.
I know the trick. My dad was a doctor.
It depends. on what I
Jerry,
eat.
you're so sweet, man. Thank you, buddy.
So when you were in there having a piss, did you have a thought as an effect of what we've said so far? Something you want to bring up, or do I come up with something?
I just was. The main thought that I had was how wonderfully glorious this exchange has been so far. You know, I was just thinking, boy, this is what I call a very astute and in tune individual that I'm talking with, and I'm very grateful to that.
Oh, I appreciate it.
That's the thought that came to me.
Well, that's great, because I know him that, and I wish I had more chances to talk to Frank when he was alive to do it, because I knew. Did you notice, and you haven't read the interview with Frank that I did, through the medium? You haven't read that yet, or heard it?
I think I read a couple of
he really surprised me. He said, I was talking about how that interview, the first one, got bootlegged.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this beautiful bootleg, 30 years of Frank Zappa, and it has a beautiful booklet.
Wow.
And I open up the thing. This is where, it kind of makes you think it is really Frank. I said, that interview did, blah, blah, blah. Well, it got bootlegged. And he says, well, you're in good company. And I go, what do you mean? And he says, well, that's what the thing about me. I was always bootlegged, and it was an honor, And this is from perspective of that, because he didn't like it when it was alive.
Absolutely.
But he knew it was an honor even then. So I go, oh, okay, well, yeah, it's an honor. I'm in good company. I got bootlegged,
That's
I made
right.
the short list,
Right.
So then later in the interview, he totally surprises me. Somehow it came up, and he said, you should have been in rock and roll. And I said, what do you mean? Because I didn't know I could play an instrument. And he said, and I did not know. Well, I never had any instrumental training. And he says, and I said, well, he says, you could have been in my band. I go, what? And then I said, what instrument would I play? He says, it doesn't matter. Just show up on time. and he just show up in time. And then just shortly after, what was the story that triggered? Who told us about that? Showing up on time. I don't know what it was. I heard it was somebody in the band, someone later say in an interview that, it was Mike Keneally on his webpage. When he joined the band, the important point he pointed out, and I just read it a few months ago, was he had to be on time. That was the most important thing. Is that true in your experience?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I said, Jerry, and then the interview got misprinted. And the part that didn't get in Flipside and had to be redone, they left out a third of it, was right at the point where you could be in the band. No, I go, what instrument would I play? Something like that, right at that point. And so you don't know what he's going to say to that. And my friends said, well, what instrument they were really intrigued by this question. But the point is, when Jerry sent me the missing page, and I look at it, and so I read, and I had to read it to an old buddy, the guy who turned me on to Frank, way back in the 60s. I read it to him, and I was reading it, I just read Keneally a few days before, The Synchronicity, and I go, it says, just show up on time, and I'm reading this to Steve mechanically, and then, wait a minute, Steve. This is fucking proof it is fucking Frank.
Right.
And I finished talking to Steve, and I called Jerry. I said, look at this. And I told Jerry, and he knows enough about the Zappa scene. He said, that's fucking right. That it doesn't matter. If you're on the team, like Ian Gale's a player, Daniel Shore, you don't have to play an instrument. Just show up on time is the musical reference point, but it's so Frank.
Music, yeah.
It's so Frank.
Because music is time and space,
That's
man.
right.
And the space will take care of itself. Just be in the time frame, and then it happens.
Do you know that?
I just got to quickly relate a story about being on time. When I first joined the band, well, what's the regime here, Frank? Well, in terms of rehearsal, he says, well, you guys get together for about 4 hours, and then I generally blow by about 6. You get in at 2.
Yeah.
You practice, and there's no conductor or anything. Terry sort of runs you guys through it, and you'll work on a few things, and then I get there at 6, and then you guys take a little dinner break when we'll rehearse, then we'll take a dinner break about 8, then we'll finish up usually about 10 or 11. He says, okay, good.
In time to get home for
Yeah, right.
Mary Hartman
Right,
and all
for
that.
after-news
Yeah.
TV.
So he basically
So-
was
no, but
6 to 11, 5 hours.
For him.
Yeah,
for
for
us,
him.
it was 2.
Right.
You know, so it was
Yeah.
an 9-hour job
Yeah.
a day.
Yeah.
Most people don't realize how much we
So he's
rehearse.
describing this.
So anyway, so the reality of this equation turns
Yeah.
into this. The first day of rehearsal, I get there at 2 and nobody's there, and it's okay with me, man,
Yeah.
because I got all these toys to play with,
Yeah.
and I got charts, and I'm
Yeah.
having a great time. So anyway, Terry gets there about 4:30. You know, I didn't say anything, but we start rehearsing, and
4:30. He's
No,
2.5 hours late. 2:30.
no, check it out. I said, Terry, what time does rehearsal start? And he said, oh, here's the game plan, Mars. Like, Frank usually shows up at 6. We start rehearsing like about 5 or so. Well, you'll find us over at the Nicodel. You know, it's just like we're playing when Frank gets here. That's what we have to remember. We're playing when Frank gets here.
Oh, that's
So-
all. Yeah.
So
he
I
had
mean,
a cheat factor.
some days if we had more work, we'd start like at
Yeah.
4. But I'd always get there
Never
at 2
start-
because I loved like making tapes and experimenting, and I mean,
Oh,
it
you
was
were
fun for
Frank.
me.
You're a workaholic.
I was a
You were the
workaholic
mirror
at that-
image.
at that point.
Yeah.
But it was so funny how Terry. It seemed so like irreverent
That
the
was.
way that he said, you know, like, well, we just as long as we're
We're
playing when he
Frank
gets
comes
here.
in. It's always
He says, because trust me, everything changes.
when he shows up. No, it's so much like it's so relevant to what Frank says. He says, "I'm not friends with the guys in the band. The
That's
boss.
right.
You can never like the boss. That whole thing." And of course, you guys were like, or they were like employees. They used to smoke dope behind the scenes on the road, the grandmothers and that. But in this case, the guys are like employees, jerking off, taking time off, like happens everywhere, right?
Right.
Now the time factor, but
So you see that totally changed the next incarnation of the band.
right, because
Frank
Terry Terry had to go in a sense. He was slacking off too much.
In a sense,
Yeah.
yes. But the whole sensibility of the way things were structured changed after that.
You couldn't do that anymore.
We-
That's what you're going to say, right?
Right. Frank instituted the concept of clone meister, who
Yeah.
got paid a little bit more. Everybody kind of hated you, and type thing. You know, like the band would rehearse from 2 to, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
and then it was structured. And then if you were an old timer in the band, it was looser, and the
Yeah.
puppies would have to, you
Yeah,
know, they'd
yeah.
have to rehearse a little bit harder, so you'd come in and maybe an hour later, but whatever, you know. But it
Seniority.
changed. It changed rank half,
Yeah.
right? So, but the thing is that that was the line of demarcation. That band, it was never a loose rehearsal anymore. It was, you know, brass tacks.
That's during the '78, the beginning of the
From-
cells
from-
and the
from-
germs. That point on
exactly,
the tour.
exactly.
In other words, so when it came back after '78, you come back. You're now rehearsing.
Right, there was
situation.
always a clone
Then
meister
it was
then.
new. So it started in
Right.
the summer of '78 or something
Correct,
like that.
correct.
Now what? I think I forgot. Now what? Why did we bring this up? That the time.
We were talking about just be on time.
Oh, great. Thank you.
You bet. I'm
Because
good at that shit.
no, that was very important. Is that time and space, blah blah blah? Do you know that Frank disagreed with Einstein? This is the amazing.
I wouldn't doubt it, but
Yeah,
clue me in
yeah.
this realm.
E equals mc squared. Space and time are interchangeable like mass and energy, okay,
Right.
in simple terms.
Okay.
Well, Frank in an interview says, I think it might have been in that Don Men thing, 1992, because I just saw it on the internet, and someone quoted it, and he goes, so I disagree with Einstein that space and time are interacting. He says time is the outer sphere where all things are happening, all time's happening all at once. The inner sphere of space is a Mobius strip.
Mm-hmm.
So he separates time away from space.
Mhm.
Einstein didn't do that. He had them operate
intertwined.
Intertwined. Like
That's right.
they're both components of the Mobius strip.
That's right.
And it's a very interesting concept. But that's the incredible arrogance and genius of Frank. That he says, well, you guys, yeah, he built a bomb, so what? But he had it wrong.
Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, he had it all wrong. And then when you know that quote, it fits with his whole thing of
totally.
the upper and the lower, and time is all time. It's the unknown zone where all things are happening. And in this immediate middle zone where UFOs come in, that's an effect of the modulating of above and below frequencies, which is the time zone where everything's
Mhm.
happening. And then he says that's why he had a secular materialist view in a way of psychic, that's someone who's just zapping, going out of the Mobius strip of space and zapping into a time and experiencing because it's already happening.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
talk about going in. Now we're coming full circle, which I like to have in my dialogues. Your opening line was Frank was the beyond. Well, that was time in the sphere.
You know, musically,
And that's why you had to be on time.
Absolutely.
The win.
That's,
the win
that's,
factor.
That's, right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
So, do I rest my case that was Frank? What? How could a medium? This guy doesn't even know Frank. How could he fake that?
That's
you
right.
know what I'm saying?
That's right. I just wanted to say that it seems a bit obvious, but to me, quintessentially, Inca Roads is a tremendous manifestation of that.
The song?
The song Inca Roads, to me.
Well, you know what, Gail, you go into it, but Gail says that's her favorite song. And Gail's always talking code, I think. I give her, she's been around, she's an insider.
She's not always talking code, but sometimes she slips out of it.
Slips out of it, and by
Did
saying...
you know what I just said?
Well, I'm trying to figure out. She says Inca Roads is her favorite song. Is that slipping out of code?
No, that's code.
Okay, so now elaborate why that's real.
But here's slipping out of code.
Oh, okay.
Here's slipping out of code.
We're getting real esoteric, eh?
Yeah, but I don't want to belabor this because I know
No.
we have to move on. But
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that number one, Frank was famous for writing mini operas in songs. Mini operas in songs.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like verses would be analogous to arias, choruses would be analogous to recitatives. You know what I mean?
Right.
And Inca Roads to me is quintessential. It has all of the elements
Of an opera.
of. Well, I'm saying that a song, say like Punky's Whips,
Right.
is like a mini opera.
I see.
Brown Shoes Don't Make It is like an opera.
Oh,
You know what I mean?
So Inca Roads is not.
No, Inca Roads is as well, but the point I'm trying to make is that to me it's like the quintessential song of Frank. It has everything there, stylistic.
In light of the UFO quote.
In light of
Yeah.
the UFO,
Yeah.
the whole thing, and then like the Guacamole Queen. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like.
Did a vehicle? It's a question. It's
Yeah.
his ultimate
or it's
question.
just some Indians upon a hill. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like.
That's his time. You're right. That's his question.
It just
Did
came to me as we're talking about
Yeah.
this that I wanted to say that to me it's all, and I'm not talking code here. I'm
Yeah.
breaking code.
In other words, you just realize why it is through our conversation. It is to you, and it fits. That
yeah,
it's the
it's
key
the essence.
thing.
It's
Yeah.
it's the essence
Because-
thing. And then you have the glory of instrumentally, not even a lyric on this. Wa-da-dee-da-doo-day, wa-da-doo-day.
Yeah.
That is.
He's
Look,
almost.
I don't
it's
necessarily
emotional.
believe in a heaven or a hell, but if there is a heaven where everything is peace and pure,
Yeah.
that theme embodies it.
That's
And-
right.
And yet it starts off so like, like out there.
Right,
You know what I
right,
mean?
right.
It's like you're
Chaos.
landing. You're landing
yeah.
in.
You're entering the alien,
and-
the unknown.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the thing is that to me, it's all. When I first started listening to Frank, that album to me was like the best album he had ever done up to
Yeah.
that point.
Yeah.
It just had everything: fidelity, substance. Like
The
way
latest
production of it,
technology, yeah.
the latest technology, and brilliant lyrics, and all of the songs were like hits to me. You know what I mean?
That's
Every
right,
single
yeah.
one. It wasn't just that it was a cool Zappa song. These were like monstrous anthems. These songs, and it's always still.
And you think of it because as you starts off bizarre, but then if we do find out there's life in other places and there is a UFO, if that whole thing is real, then it's a shift for mankind where we move into a new dimension. And it's a happy effect, which is that riff you just said, that heavenly. Well, do it again.
I want to reiterate this though, just the way the structure of the song is. It starts did a vehicle lyrically. It's got that, okay? Then you have instrumentally okay, an augmentation of that.
Right.
Then you have it's the same thing that it just keeps
Different climates or different effects of the intercommunication
of the same word.
Yeah,
of the
the
same
same word.
macro
Word.
nutrients.
That's
Do you know
right.
what I mean?
Which and then it
Or
goes, then
DNA,
do the
whatever.
happy part. When we now know the happy resolution of the mystery is in the sound as you just did it. What's the happy? You know that part? The happy part. You just did it.
It's instrumental.
Yeah.
And it's like just on the record, it's just a marimba. But obviously, when we played it, it's like it's just speed of light. And everybody wants to play the lick instead of just Ruth. you know?
Right.
That was another difference between the later bands and the early bands. Is that in the early bands, it was like the guys didn't want to play the licks, man, because like Frank, what the fuck are you writing for us? You know what I mean? It was just like
they couldn't. You mean?
I didn't say they couldn't. I would say they would prefer maybe not to play them all the hard licks.
Right, okay.
They were challenged. But for us, we were like young Olympians, man.
That's
and it was just like, right harder, shit.
Yeah, harder. Yeah.
Did I give that story about the middle part of Jumbo when Frank, he's looking,
well, I heard it
with
in
the hands.
yeah,
that's like a classic example, you know.
But listen, this is that is. We'll end on this point, I guess. But that gave me a big insight about Frank just listening this morning, because the point is, Finnegan's Wake is not a book. He has all forms of media. He's trying to paint a movie and eventually a television set.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Now, Frank, this has come full circle. He's not a musician, and he played tricks on musicians. Your musical conventional training. So I tried to read it, and he
when
was
a baby could do it.
Yeah. In other words, he was presenting a map to play a football play, and he fooled you. Says you think you are what you is. You get beyond your categories of yourself.
That's
I'm
right.
presenting you a sport thing. That's what that whole story illustrates that. And listen to Juha's great interview for what we're talking about, what we're referring to. Okay, Jared. Do you want to say something? Let's give him a last word.
Well,
did we
this
finish?
isn't original, but music is the best.
You know what I said to Frank at the end of that interview, or Bob Marshall did? He goes, I go, and I sort of knew, but I go, so we were just making great, we were going into the mysteries, we were just really talking great for 3.5 hours, and I said, so this conversation will never end. And he goes, oh yes it will. And then he goes, look at Jerry, he's over there, his leg is bobbling like impatient. And I go, this is a good point to end on. And then we all agreed. After I just said, this will never end. And then within 10 seconds, it's over. That's Frank's shift.
Absolutely.
And that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to end this very hard. We know Tom and I will continue talking forever because we've just started, right?
Actually, right now I'm going over to Arthur's.
No, I don't mean now. We will continue our dialogue about explaining what happened to you.
Undoubtedly.
What happened to you?
Yeah, what happened to me?
Did a vehicle, did he get brain implanted, with Frank's microchip? Okay.
Well, so I have often thought, are you still running?
Yeah.
Because I had an encounter.
You want this on?
I would like to have it.
Okay.
Actually. We can have final editing
Right.
rights here.
Right.
But I did have an encounter with a UFO. In
time and place, and can you give a little quick details?
In very quick details. In the fall, it was the Halloween of 1973.
Right.
In Litchfield, Connecticut.
Is that middle Connecticut, west, south?
It's in the western part of Connecticut.
Okay.
And I was on a lake called Bantam Lake. I'm driving to I don't want to relate the whole story.
Yeah.
But I did see, and I have no qualms in saying 100% certain of a UFO that was
Had you heard Inca Roads came out in 75?
I had never heard Inca Roads. I heard Inca Roads when I was already in the band a year.
Well, you didn't know, you weren't listening to his albums.
Yeah, I didn't.
Right.
I told you I knew 2 songs.
Right,
I didn't
that's
even hear
right.
an album.
Which I wondered, 2 minutes ago about that.
I never heard an album. I only knew because Ed Mann wrote out the charts for me. But anyway.
So you had a UFO experience.
I had a UFO experience, and I didn't necessarily come in contact with aliens, but the craft was above me. And there was no doubt in my mind, and it's all been borne out with other people. Even that night, when we talked to the state police, it was 4 bandmates and myself going to a New Year's, a Halloween party that we were playing at, a jazz unit I was working with in Connecticut. And
it was confirmed by other witnesses.
23 witnesses that night. And the fact of the matter is that I had no direct contact, but I knew and I felt in my inner self that Jesus Christ, that they're taking something from me. I feel something being extracted. I feel like there's something
when
going.
They hovered over you.
They were hovering, man, and everywhere we went, that the vehicle moved silently, and it was massive. It was so fucking huge, and it was as tall as it was up like 3 times a telephone pole. I don't know what the distance is, but it was right there, and it was like a football field right above us.
Ooh.
The whitest light I'd ever seen in my life, and I don't want to get into specifics, but from that point on, I've always wondered, did they do something to my head at that time?
Were they working for Frank and then zapped? Am I right?
Put us together.
They prepared you for
7
Frank.
years, so 6 years
Frank
later.
was working for them.
That's it. Always was in the back of my head, and
as
I
you
still
got
will
to
never know.
As you got to know how strange that fucker guy was, Zappa, you said, "Wait a minute, that was what you mean."
That's exactly
is
what I mean.
Is Frank an alien, or something?
Is he a general in another army?
When I first met him, and in the dark on his house, I looked at him. He came walking up the steps like this. I don't know I don't know if he did it much, but he walked like a loaf.
Well, he had a sway back too, you know.
No, but he walked like Groucho Marx. Remember, he'd go like this, and he's come up his steps. This is before the fence, and he's coming up like this. And I'm standing here. I go, "Hi, Frank," and he's with Gail, and he goes, "Hello," and he stands. I'm there looking at this guy. I'm looking up at him, you know. And I started to talk to him, and you know the Absolutely Free cover where he has a spiral come his eyes. I swear, this fucking spiral came out at me. Now this could be all subjective, but I use that as a reference point to add life to the question. Maybe he was an alien or something weird. You know what I mean? Because the spiral, I've never seen anybody give me a spiral.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, Frank was working for somebody else.
Oh, Jerry, you wouldn't believe my we developed that this past 2 days.
Well, good, wonderful. I've often thought that he was just a freaking 4-star general of somebody else's presidency.
I'm going to end this interview with this statement, which will blow everybody away.
Good.
And it's a great thing. You have to establish
the beachhead.
Yeah.
Let's blow the bridge up, and then let's get the fuck out of Dodge.
There is a reason why Lumpy Gravy is written in his father's name, Francis Vincent Zappa, not Frank Vincent Zappa. Because the composer behind the whole Frank Zappa Big Note operation was his father, and his father was military intelligence.
Bingo.
That's who he was.
As we say in Italian, basta.
Is that right?
It's right, man.
Basta. So that's another topic. We'll do that part 2. We've been developing this case. It's unbelievable. Anyways, isn't it fun?
And Frank did love gunpowder, didn't he?
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, he says he worked with explosives and electricity. Explosives is hardware. Electricity is software.
That's right.
That's the satellite conductor works with both. They run the Madison Avenue warfare on people through imagery, and the hardware warfare through covert and little wars in Grenada and Vietnam.
Right.
Hot and cold. And Frank goes, some like it hot, some like it cold. And McLuhan. That's why in my chart, you should look at my chart someday, you have McLuhan and Zappa as equals in a certain phase of the 60s.
Listen, guys, I gotta put a move on it.
All right, man.
So, geez, we're down the bench from 4 to 8 tonight, tomorrow. If you want to come by, continue. Or if you're not, anyways, we'll be there.
From 4
to 8 tonight, today.
Yeah. No, that won't work for me.
And we'll be there next Saturday.
You're going to be out here for a while?
Yeah, another week.
Oh, cool.
So we're there on the bench from 4 to 8.
Oh, the bench, down at the bench. Yeah,
right near you.
Fucking A.
Yeah.
Tonight and tomorrow.
And Saturday. And you got to talk to Carolyn about this fucking thing. Now here's the punchline. She wears different Frank Zappa t-shirts in the laboratory while working with this incredible new UFO matter, unbelievable matter. And I'm developing my thesis. I want you to read my paper at some point. I did 2 manifestos. And part 1's about Finnegan's Wake, and then part 2 is about how Frank outdid Finnegan's Wake. And it leads to that Frank was trying to describe this new life matter that Connie is working with. Now that's
you know what? I just remembered that you in New York you were telling me something
a bit about
this.
That. Yeah, you got to come and ask her.
Right.
I'm only half the story.
Hey, is the camera off?
Yeah.
No.
That was on camera?
Yeah.
Oh, that's all.